Hey, what's up guys? Time to go ahead and talk about some radar detector testing. The past week has been really busy. I tested 9 different remote mount radar detectors against 4 different police radar gun frequencies, 3 different days on 2 different test courses. So needless to say, it's been a pretty busy week. And in this video, I want to go ahead and share the results with you guys of what I saw, what I learned during all the different testing. Now, in this testing, we are focused on the remote mount radar detectors. There's a number of different ones available on the market. In this test, I wanted to focus on the very best ones available on the market. And here's what we're looking at. We've got the Escort and Beltronics M3s. We've got the Radenso STi-R Plus. We've got the Net Radar. And we've got the STi-R VIP. Now for testing purposes, I use not 1, but at least 2 different copies of all of these detectors. That way, in case there's different sample variations, maybe one's a little bit better performing than the other, we can take that into account. I also ran every detector 3 times against every single radar gun. As far as the radar guns that we've got, on 33.8, we've got the MPH B3. On 34.7, we've got the Stalker 2. On 35.5, we've got the Detector Genesis 2 Select, and on K-band, we've also got the Genesis 2 Select. It can run on both frequencies. Now, as you can see, we've got a lot of stuff here. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with these radar detectors, I'm going to be doing a video now that this testing is complete that kind of goes over all the different detectors. That way you're familiar with it. But in a nutshell, what we're looking at with the M3s, I tested the 9500 Ci, the STi-R Plus, and the original STi-R. This is Escort's, top of the line remote mount detector. It's the same guts that you've got in the Redline and the Magnum. It's basically been the benchmark for long range performance. It's got automatic GPS lockouts, low speed muting, red light camera alerts. It's a great all-in-one package. However, the filtering is getting a bit dated in this point. It's kind of long in the tooth. The blind spot filtering is just really not that effective. In fact, everything else here actually does a better job. And for that reason, now that we're coming up against a lot more of those cars, you're maybe going to want to go for a newer detector. So the question is, can we have something like this with better filtering that still has, comparable levels of performance? So that's really what I'm curious to see here. Now, the next option is the Radenso STi-R Plus. This is probably one of the most direct competitors to the STi-R Plus. It's got comparable levels of performance and better blind spot filtering. It doesn't have some of the features like GPS lockouts and low speed muting. You can actually pair it with the old Beltronics 975 interface. It's a really dated interface. Alternatively, you can plug it into the ALP, but because there's no frequency display made available here, you can't actually do GPS lockouts the way you can here. Now, Radenso is going to be releasing their own new controller for the STi Plus called the Radenso RC. I actually showed that to you guys when I was back in Vegas for SEMA, and that's going to be really cool. That's going to give us the lockouts. You're going to have multiple antenna support to do arrows, all that kind of stuff, so that's going to be a really cool one coming on down the line, but same performance because it's this antenna here. Now, this next one is going to be the Net Radar. This is probably one of my favorite picks for kind of a good all-around radar detector. It doesn't have the longest range performance, but this is more of a well-rounded detector. It's got great performance, better blind spot filtering than the other two. It is designed to be paired directly with the ALP. It's not a standalone radar detector. This particular one, when you add it with your phone, you can get GPS lockouts. They're kind of manual, kind of automatic. So you got your lockouts, your low-speed muting, all that good stuff. You already have support for 2 antennas if you want to run front and rear for arrows. You can even get a 3rd antenna for MRCD detection up in Canada. So this is going to be a great all-around detector, and this is one that's showing a lot of promise. It's probably one of my favorites to mention as just kind of an all-around radar detector. And finally, we've got the STi-R VIP. This is an interesting one. This is your top-of-the-line radar detector. I've been running one of these for actually the past year or so, and it showed a ton of promise and potential. Unfortunately, it hasn't been living up to the potential. You see, the firmware updates, well, the firmware that was running, version 3 point blah, 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 was really buggy. On paper, this detector is sensational. This thing was clobbering all my other detectors on range. It's more advanced, it's more capable, it's got pretty much every feature you could possibly want. Great BSM filtering, arrows, RDD immunity, everything, but a lot of bugs. And it's kind of been heartbreaking, to be honest, because it has so much potential, and it's been also really disappointing. However, STi-R just released a bombshell of a firmware update, version 4.0.26, and version 4 of the firmware update addresses almost all of the bugs, which is amazing. The BSM filtering is finally fantastic. The display is now working better. There's a new display that's out. I mean, so much has been addressed that it's finally actually starting to turn into my ultimate dream radar detector, and I'm super excited to test this one out. The firmware update was released just a few days before my test, so perfect timing. I had a chance to test this on the newest firmware version. I actually saw some really interesting stuff with this one that I'll talk about in just a minute. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the different test courses. Now, the first test course that I tested on, it's one that I've actually used several times before, and it's worked out really well, especially in the summertime. I've had actually great separation between different tiers of detectors, and that's really what I'm hoping to see. You know, the higher end detectors give you longer range, the lower end detectors, not so much. On this particular course, I was running all the detectors. They were all alerting right around the same spot, which was kind of annoying. They were basically all maxing out the course, which tells me a couple things. Number one, we're dealing with high-end, top-tier radar detectors. That we already know. None of these detectors suck. Yes, some of them do have a little bit better performance than the other, but we're not talking about massive differences in performance. Additionally, because it's also winter time now, a lot of the trees have lost their leaves, the foliage is gone, and so there's not a lot of trees there to absorb the radar signal. So this time of year, a lot of these radar detectors are actually getting better range than they did in the summer. Now, that's all well and good, but I want to see what are the differences between the detectors. You know, is a more expensive detector going to give you more range than a less expensive detector, and by how much? You know, is it worth it to actually go for a higher end detector? Again, I'm going to be doing a full review talking about all of the different things: BSM filtering, lockouts, red light camera alerts, price, all the important stuff. Range is just one of them. In this particular test, we're focusing on range, but nonetheless, I'm really curious to see what are the differences and can we see them in testing. So after the first day of testing, it's kind of like, okay, I'd seen this before in previous times when I'd gone back to that test course. I wasn't seeing a big separation in detectors. I'd even tried changing a couple things, and I was still seeing all the detectors alerting right around in the same location, plus minus a couple feet. So went home, went online, took a look at a couple different test courses online to go take a look the next day and find, a better, different test course. Now, while I was out there testing, I actually saw an issue with the stinger which really concerned me. Remember how I mentioned how all the detectors were kind of alerting in the same spot? We were actually starting out with the Ka band testing, and I was like, okay, well, what if we change frequencies? Maybe on a different frequency we'll see more separation, right? So testing 34.7, went to 35.5, then we went to K band. K band, as you guys know, is a little bit different because the detector has different filtering options for TSR, BSM filtering, etc., right? When I got to K band, the stinger actually started having some issues with a new firmware update. You see, initially it was maxing out the course just like the other detectors. Around 2,700 feet was the detection range. Then after a couple runs, I started seeing detection ranges not at 2,700 feet, but down closer to like 400 feet, 300, 200 feet. I started seeing some runs where I could drive up to the radar detector. It would never alert at all. My speed would be acquired. I would drive past the radar car and my detector would never go off. Clearly this was an issue. I thought it was actually something due to GPS lockouts. When I got home, I actually had a chance to talk with Stinger headquarters in the Netherlands for a good half hour. I was actually sharing, here's what I saw in testing. I sent them the detailed logs. One thing that I really love about this detector is you can log things on a USB drive and send them really detailed logs of everything that's going on with the detector, what it's seeing, the decisions that it's making, when it's filtering, why it's muting, all that kind of stuff. My guess was it had something to do to lockouts, but that didn't really make sense because it was not necessarily filtering the signals out altogether, but sometimes giving me really short range. Stinger had actually suspected that it has to do with the in-car BSM filtering. You see, one of the cool features that this detector offers is if your car has a blind spot monitoring system that actually causes the radar detector in your car to false alert, it can actually learn that signal, recognize it, and filter it out independently of other radar sources around you. Now, the issues that I was having actually sounded almost exactly like the BSM filter being activated, even though I turned it off for testing purposes. See, when I turned on the detector parked right next to the radar car, it saw a really strong signal. And typically, if that happens, it's going to assume that's coming from your car. And what happens is if you drive away, if it stays really strong, then okay, well that signal is coming from your car. If you drive far away, and then lose the signal, it's probably a radar source that's not coming from your car, right? Now, however, even though I turned that filter off, there was an issue where I started up next to a really strong source, I drove towards it, and then I turned around and came back, and it was still seeing that source. It figured it was from my car, and it was muting it. This was actually a bug that we discovered with the STi-R firmware. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Had a chance to talk with STi-R. I sent him the detailed logs and all the information that we saw in testing. And then I actually went to sleep that night. They're in the Netherlands, like 9 hours ahead of me, right? So while I slept, STi-R analyzed the logs with their engineers, updated the firmware, and then when I woke up the next morning, they had sent me a beta firmware with a fix for the bug that I had seen in testing. Went out, retested it with their beta firmware, it fixed the bug. When we finished testing and confirmed everything worked, the next day, STi-R released that firmware update, and now that's the new current firmware update based on the bug and the fix that we actually saw in testing. That is amazing. I am blown away by that level of customer support. The fact that they can, number one, even see what's going on thanks to the advanced logging capabilities. Then number two, taking the time to go ahead and analyze the logs, release a firmware update within a matter of hours. We go out and test it, confirmed it's fixed. That is sensational. I am blown away by that level of support and service. Like, hats off to you guys at STi-R. That's really awesome. So again, this guy had a lot of issues. They have fixed a ton of them, and what they're doing now with their firmware updates are awesome. So again, a lot of stuff to come here. I'm going to be spending more time with this guy to really get a good feel for it. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and talk about the second day of testing after we got the firmware update fix for the STi-R. Now, for the second day of testing, I wanted to go ahead and get some separation between the detectors, right? So we were actually scouting out different courses, and I was looking for things to make it harder on the radar detectors. I wanted things like, a lot of trees to absorb the radar signal, maybe some hills to block the signal, maybe have the radar gun hiding and tucked behind a curve to just further make it harder for the detectors, right? The radar gun's shooting off at an angle, and it's hidden behind some trees, so you have to drive, and it makes it tougher for the radar guns. And I found a course that did this, and I went ahead and started testing, and I started seeing some separation that I was hoping for between some of the top-end detectors and some of the less expensive detectors. Awesome. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the results on day 2 of testing on the second course with all these different detectors and see how everything compares.
Now here's a look at the test course that we used. The course from start to finish was about 2,000 feet or so. You start right over here, we kind of went down, turned around, and started running the course. Over here, a few of the detectors were able to get super far long-range fringe detections, basically maxing out the course, which was awesome. Now as you start driving this way, there's kind of a hill that you start going up here, and a lot of the detectors actually started alerting when you start going up this hill or sitting on top of the hill, which makes sense. Then you start getting closer and closer. There's kind of some gentle bends in the road like this, and then you start kind of coming around to the left. The radar gun is basically hiding kind of behind these trees here, being blocked by a lot of these trees, and it's actually aiming this direction to clock the cars as they're coming around the bend this way. This is actually the kill zone right here as you start kind of coming around the bend. My car was actually parked right over here. I'll show you that in just a second. Initially, we actually had the radar gun sitting in my car, and my car was basically the radar car, right? Like a police car with a radar gun in it. It's clocking cars this way, but what we found was a lot of the radar detectors were actually able to max out the course, and we weren't seeing any separation between the detectors. So what we did, and I'll show you this too in just a second, is we actually moved the radar guns a little bit farther back to kind of tuck them farther back behind this bend to get them farther away, have more trees blocking the radar signal, etc. And to do this, we actually had the radar guns sitting on a special tripod. We had the antenna on a tripod, and the radar guns basically sitting on the side of the road in a weatherproof box just to back things up a little bit farther. And when we did that, we started noticing more separation between the detectors. So some of the higher end ones started alerting here, and we noticed some of the other ones took a little bit longer for them to start going off because we'd actually backed the radar gun up a bit. And I'll go ahead and play a quick clip where you can see this will be from the STi-R VIP, the STi-R going off from the initial detection and kind of our reaction and our excitement of seeing some of the separation, and you'll see how the course looks. So let's go ahead and take a look at the test course now.
There you go. Good job, STi-R. So you can do that.
We'll have to do more runs with mine then.
Yeah.
That's like a fringe kind of ish.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what we want if we want.
Exactly, yeah. That separation.
Exactly.
just done it twice now though, because once I don't.
Yeah.
Have trouble accepting that, but twice, yeah.
Me too. I was kind of hoping it did because I was like, that was a really good run. I want to be able to count that.
Exactly.
So. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the results. Now, here are the results starting off with 34.7. It's the first band that we tested. It is the most popular band in use around the country. Now, the way these results work, every detector is going to be color-coded. So you'll see the STi-R VIPs in purple, the Radenso STi Plus is yellow, the 9500 Ci is going to be dark blue, the original STi-R is in red, the STi-R Plus is going to be light blue, and finally the net radar is going to be in green to make it really easy to identify what detector is which. Now, if you noticed in the video that we just watched, there was an initial detection range where the stinger went off, right? And then it lost the signal, and then there was a second detection zone where it picked the signal back up. Now, a number of detectors actually managed to pick it up in that kind of initial detection zone way off at the very beginning of the course. You can see the stinger did it a couple times. The Radenso STi Plus managed it, and so did the 9500 Ci. Then past that detection zone, that's the main area where most detectors actually went off, and every detector was able to pick it up there. You'll see the Radenso, the O, the Plus, net radar, 9500 Ci, all managed to do detections there. The stinger, you see it's got a couple detections up here, and then it also had some detections closer up at the top of the hill. And so you can see kind of we've got the STi Plus, the 9500 Ci, kind of the M3s are all doing up here. The net radar was a little bit down behind the competition, so you notice it had one good detection here, but the rest of them are a little bit farther back relative to the competition. And that's kind of what we saw a lot of times with the net radar is it's a great unit. It's not designed to be the most powerful, longest range unit ever. It's designed to be kind of a good all-around unit. So it's got good performance, and remember, this is some stiff competition that we're talking about, and yet it's still able to hold its own and do really well here. It did have one detection that was pretty short relative to the competition, but something to keep in mind is the kill zone, the area where the radar gun can actually pick up the vehicle, was around here in this particular course. So even though it had a shorter detection, it was still plenty to give you a save in practice, right? So here's a look at how things all landed here on 34.7. Next, we'll go ahead and take a look at 33.8. This is what we tested next. The longest detections actually came from the STi Plus, as well as the Stinger and the 9500 Ci, so awesome. You'll notice these are not actually 2,000-foot detection ranges. If we go back to 34.7, see how it's 2,000 feet was the maximum range? That was way out at the very start of the course. On 33.8, we didn't see any 2,000-foot detection. 1,600 or so was about the best. So right around as we're starting to go up the hill and then cresting, up on top of the hill. And in that range, we can see we've got the STi Plus, the Stinger, 9500 Ci, the O, Stinger, STi Plus, O. So kind of all these detectors are doing really well. So the wire bonded M3s are managing to edge out the Plus, which is also an M3, but it's got the packaged LNA, and I've done a separate video kind of going over the differences and why the wire-bonded LNAs tend to have a little bit better performance than the packaged ones. You can watch that video, click the button up on top of the screen, but in short, you can see the M3s are doing really well. The Plus down a little bit less. The STi Plus, the net radar in green, a little bit lower than the competition. Still plenty of range in practice, but not quite up to par of the other detectors here. The Stinger actually did have one pretty bad detection, so that's kind of something interesting as well, but overall it seemed to do pretty well, but not quite as dominant as it was on 34.7, as when we were looking here on 33.8. Next, going to 35.5. Again, our top tier performers, 9500 Ci in dark blue and the O in red. So again, the wire bonded M3s are owning on 35.5. They've got the longest detection ranges, just about maxing out the course. So good job by the M3s. Then we've actually got a great detection here on 35.5 by the net radar in green. Here's the Stinger, the Plus, and kind of most everybody you can see all clumping together as we're going up to the top of that hill. We've got the Stinger here. Again, kind of had some shorter detections, which was interesting. Again, we did have some traffic on the course, so that could definitely be one of the reasons. But doing a number of runs, it didn't look like traffic was too big of an issue. It was minimal, but that could be a possibility of why we saw some of the lower detections. That's something to keep in mind about testing in practice, is that definitely can impact the results as well, and it's tough to get no traffic situations. We definitely want to look for it, but we will see that sometimes in practice. But nevertheless, we did have some variety of results here. The net radar actually did pretty well. You can see it's got some good runs here on 35.5, managing to edge out many times the STi Plus, even the M3. So a great job there. And then coming down toward the bottom, we just talked about that. We did have some lower tier runs there as well. Next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at K-band. K-band is an interesting one. We've got a number of different ways that we can test a detector. Do you test it with maximum performance and all the filters turned off, which is great for rural areas, but you're going to get tons of false alerts? Or do you start enabling some of the filters and see how those compare? So we actually tested, well, all those situations. This first one that we're looking at is with all the filters turned off. This is going to be kind of unusable in practice, but this is going to show us kind of the full raw potential of what a detector is capable of. So taking a look at first, we've got the O and the plus. So the M3 is doing really well. HD Plus, the Net Radar doing well. Here's the 9500 Ci, and here's the STi-R. So these are all kind of, basically maxing out the course way over at the start. Then over at the top of the hill, we've got HD Plus, STi-R, and Net Radar. We did have one lower range detection by the 9500 Ci and some actually really bad detections by the STi-R. This is actually what I talked about earlier in the video about how the STi-R had some really bad runs and we had to get the updated firmware. This is actually what we were seeing even on the first test course before we came to this test course was the same sort of thing, and we were able to repeat this on K-band, getting these really poor detections. We retested it with the new firmware, the beta at the time, which is now public, and it has actually since fixed this issue. So we saw this in practice in this particular test, but these results are actually no longer valid. So it should be up here. So looking at the raw performance, it looks like the M3s are pretty much going to be the leaders here, and followed really closely by the HD Plus and actually the Net Radar as well, and the STi-R just behind. So that's really interesting on K-band. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the detectors with the BSM filters turned on, which is how most people are going to run it. If you don't have traffic sensors in your area, a lot of detectors can actually filter out blind spot falses without needing TSR. So the Net Radar, for example, has a BSM filter. The STi-R has a quick trigger and regular mode. With version 3 of the firmware, I found that regular mode was needed for the BSM filtering, but with version 4, it looks like QT mode is sufficient. Less filtering, but still actually really good. We did some more testing, which I'll show you in just a second. The STi-R in QT and regular mode does look pretty comparable in terms of range, but for the BSM filtering testing, we did test it in regular mode. HD Plus, we ran it in TSR low. For all the M3s, we ran them with highway mode and TSR on. Now for the M3s, you'll see we've got the 9500 Ci and the Plus, but not the O. The O does not have TSR, so it was not included in this particular test. So anyways, looking at the results, the Net Radar actually did phenomenal here. It's actually got the longest run of the day was with the BSM filter, which was excellent. The STi-R did great as well. So did the HD Plus, and the 9500 Ci actually managed a great run with TSR on, which was interesting. And then we actually had a number of different results down here. So, a lot of the detectors managed high range detections, and they also had some shorter ones here as well. So Net Radar, Plus, STi-R, and 9500 Ci. So they all managed good runs here as well, but not quite maxing out the course. So interesting. And then next, we're going to take a look at maximum level of filtering. So with the STi-R, we're looking at regular, just like we were before. It's the same thing we just looked at. With the HD Plus, we've got TSR high, and the M3s are still set to TSR on. They don't have a separate BSM and TSR filter, so these results are actually the same as what we just looked at for the BSM filtering capabilities. But we have more filtering enabled on the Net Radar and on the HD Plus. So this is what's changing here. So taking a look at kind of your maximum level of filtering, especially for those of you guys who do have traffic sensors, you can see the STi-R got the longest range detection with the most level of filtering. The HD Plus did great, and so did the 9500 Ci. Actually managed great detections here, close to 2,000 feet. So awesome. We also had some really good detections. Again, we were coming up on top of that hill by the Plus, HD Plus, STi-R, Net Radar, etc. So we did have some variability, but they all seem to do a really good job, even with maximum level of filtering. So this was actually really good to see as well. Now with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at how each detector did individually with different levels of filtering. So starting off with the STi-R, in quick trigger mode, this is the maximum level of performance, and then in regular mode, that's got more filtering and less performance, right? So taking a look here, you can see we've got some really good detections here, and then we also did have 2 detections that were kind of as we're going up on top of that hill. And this we actually saw, those were the really bad runs that have been fixed with the new firmware. So bad runs, we'll just kind of discount those for now. So as you can see, we had 2 great runs and 2 pretty good runs. In regular mode, with more filtering, we had 1 excellent run and 1 kind of average run there. So a little bit of variability, just like we saw with quick trigger mode. So it looks like you don't necessarily, based on this test, I think more testing would definitely be helpful, but it doesn't look like regular mode impacts, or gives you a huge impact on range with the Stinger. So that's definitely good to know. And if QT mode is sufficient to get better QT reactivity with the detector without much of a performance hit, that actually sounds pretty awesome, especially considering you've got good BSM filtering here with QT mode, now with the new version of the firmware, 0.26 and 3.2 and all the new versions that are coming out, 4.0. Next, we're going to take a look at the HD Plus. This was actually really interesting. So the way that we have the results here, we've got TSR off, low, and high. TSR off, low, and high. So in theory, TSR off should give us the highest level of performance, right? And we're actually seeing that here. The longest range, TSR off, is the case. We had one, really long run, one kind of average run. TSR low, one good run, one average run. TSR high, we had kind of two average runs. And this is actually making sense. However, once we took a look at the other HD Plus, we didn't exactly see the same thing. You'll notice TSR off, we had two kind of average runs. TSR low, we had two excellent runs. And TSR high, we had an excellent run and an average run. So enabling the filters on K-band helped it perform better. That could be purely coincidental, but the results are the results. And yeah, so that was an interesting one, kind of counterintuitive on that one, but that is what we actually saw. So this one was kind of more to be expected, better results with TSR off, and this one actually not so much the case. We only ran 2 runs per detector and setting combination just for the sake of time. Instead of doing 3, we saw 2. It's possible that with more test runs, we'd have, more results to average out and kind of, take a look at things. Well, we would. But anyways, that's what we saw here with the HD Plus. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the M3s. So with the M3s, we ran them all on highway mode. We skipped auto mode or city mode to just avoid any sort of speed-dependent filtering, and we stuck strictly to TSR. So with TSR off, here's the STi-R Plus. We had maximum level of performance, basically maxing out the course. Then when we enabled TSR, you can see we were back down to about average range. So that totally makes sense. Going to the STi-R O, we've got basically maxing out the course here with TSR off. Again, the O does not offer TSR, so we did not test it with the TSR filter enabled. And then taking a look at the 9500 Ci with TSR off, we had an excellent run and an average run. And then when we enabled TSR, we had an excellent run and an average run. So not exactly the same thing that we saw here with the Plus, but that's what we saw here with the 9500 Ci. So this is a little bit inconclusive, and this is actually a little bit more of what we would expect. But again, perhaps with more and more runs and testing data, any sort of weird things would average out over time. So that's what we saw here on K-band. And then finally, taking a look here at the net radar. So here's what we've got. We've got 2 different net radars. We're going to take a look at unfiltered, just the BSM filter enabled, and then BSM and TSR enabled. Then the same thing here with the other net radar, unfiltered, BSM, and then BSM and TSR. So let's take a look. So with no filters, we've got an excellent run and an average run. With BSM filter enabled, we've got an excellent run and an average run. And TSR enabled, we've got 2 average runs. Cool, that makes sense. And then for the other net radar, so with no filter, excellent and average. BSM, kind of average and average, and then TSR, let's say a little bit less than average, so shorter runs. And again, this is kind of what we would expect, right? Unfiltered is going to perform better, and then once you start enabling the filters, it does perform worse and worse. And that's kind of the trade-off, right? Something interesting to point out is I've actually tested the net radars when they first came out, and I actually saw huge impacts to range when TSR was enabled. The detectors have actually since been updated, and now that I've retested it, you can see it's not a massive difference in performance, and that's actually great to see. So what that tells me is the updates to the net radar have actually been effective at improving the range once you still have the filter enabled. Now, to be fair, this is a different test course than I tested initially, and the test course could definitely have something to do with it as well. But nonetheless, looking at this test course, it looks like BSM and TSR do, to a certain extent, impact range, but not a ton. So if you've got a lot of blind spot cars around, or you've got traffic sensors, you can go ahead and enable the filters, and you're not going to have too much of an impact to performance, which is great to see.
Awesome. So there's the results. Now with all that data and all that testing, what can we conclude? Well, there's a number of different things that kind of I saw. So let's kind of run through the detectors and see how it goes. So starting with, well, let's start with the Stinger. This guy actually dominated on 34.7, but not so much on all the other bands. I was actually hoping that it would be kind of, especially the price that they're asking, more of a dominant player on all bands and all frequency. I haven't seen that, and in previous testing, the same has been the case. So we saw that on firmware version 3 and also now on version 4. Maybe firmware updates can change that in the future, but I'm still not seeing that the case. So if you're looking at the Stinger, you're definitely going to want to consider all the other things that it offers, not just range alone. There's a lot of other great players that offer great range. I'm not seeing like the complete level of dominance on this guy that I was hoping to, even though it did win on 34.7. So a lot of other things to consider in addition to just range alone. Kind of on the flip side, we've got the Net Radar. This guy is one that we saw that was kind of towards the bottom in many of the tests of, well, again, these are really top-end detectors, so again, it's very strong competition, and it was able to hold its own. This is not going to be a top-tier performance long-range detector, but if you're looking for really good BSM filtering without having to go for something really expensive, this is going to be a really great option, which is why I think it's a great kind of all-around pick. If you're looking for something that's going to be more of like a high-end long-range performance detector, you've got a couple options. You've got the Radenso STi-R Plus, which was consistently a great performer in this testing. A good job by Radenso. So if you're looking for good performance and good K-band filtering, this is a great option. I think this may actually be a good replacement for the M3s. I was actually looking at putting that STi-R O in my car and running it with K-band turned off, and given the fact that this guy actually performed better than the O on 33.8, I don't actually really see a good reason for installing the O anymore. So this guy is actually usable with K-band, whereas this guy is not. Even the newer M3s like the Plus and the 9500 Ci, their K-band filtering options are kind of limited. You do have the GPS lockouts, which is great, don't get me wrong, and you don't have that available here until the new Radenso RC platform comes out. So there's definitely something to be said for this guy. It's also completely RDD immune, whereas this is the only other option that's completely immune. These guys are close to being immune, maybe being detectable 15 feet away or 20 or 25 feet away, so they're almost completely stealth, but not completely stealth. So if that's something you're looking for, that's something you'll want to consider as well. But that's something I'm going to be covering in the next follow-up video, talking about all the other things in addition to range. I was hoping in this test I would see like one detector is awesome and amazing and slaughters everything else and all the other ones suck or something, but that's not really the case. Once you start getting up into higher end detectors, yes, you'll see some performance gains with some of the higher end ones over maybe some of the less expensive ones, but is that really worth it when it's got other stuff that it's going to offer? So you're definitely going to want to consider the whole package. If you're in an area where you're going to be running maybe Ka band only, these are great options. So for those of you guys who live in California, for example, if you don't need any of the K-band filtering that these guys offer, this could be a great option. If you're looking for arrows, this guy does not offer it, but this guy is going to be available once the new Radenso RC comes out. This is going to be available once the new firmware update comes out. This one has arrows, but they don't quite work properly yet with the current 4.0 firmware. This is going to be made available. So, you've got options for arrows here, but they're not actually quite available yet. So again, there's tons of things as far as BSM filtering, range, all that kind of stuff, but range alone, yes, I would say these are going to be your like top end performers. This one also is as well. This guy kind of lower end, but that's kind of a relative term because it still performed great, right? So I was hoping for more of a clear winner to this test, but I don't think that's really what I'm seeing. And so based on this, I think it's definitely worth taking a look at everything else that the detector offers, including GPS lockouts. If you compare it with your phone, if that matters for you, the BSM filtering capabilities, the price, if you need arrows, all that kind of stuff I think is going to be, in general, for most people, really the things that you're going to want to look for. If you're the type of person who wants all-out range, these are probably going to be the ones to get. This guy is great too, but the price premium is a lot more, and there's a lot of other things that you're getting besides just the range alone. I was hoping this guy would be kind of the range all-star, but in my testing and all the previous testing that I've done or all the other testers have done, I haven't seen that to be the case. One test I've seen that against a lot of the other windshield mounts, but against the remotes, I don't see this guy being a dominant player in terms of range on all bands and all frequencies. But there's a lot more that this guy offers. There's a lot more that this offers besides just range, and this guy too. So make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be covering all the other stuff, the comparisons between these detectors, in addition to range alone. So I know it's been about a half-hour video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I definitely would have hoped it would have been a more decisive win by one detector or another, but in my testing, that's not what I'm seeing. And I think that's also great information to know is when you're looking for a detector, there's a lot of other things to look at besides range, and range alone may not necessarily be the deciding factor, and that may not even be the main thing to differentiate these detectors. So to be continued in the next video. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in equipment, who has loaned me radar guns and radar detectors for testing. A big thank you to Dukes for actually coming down from Canada and helping conduct all this testing with me. It's been possible because of you guys on the forum, my Patreon supporters of helping fund this testing. It's literally because of you guys that I'm able to do all this kind of stuff. So I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy driving. Bye.